when you honor and understand an opposing perspective, that doesn't mean you're required to agree with it or to even deny your own convictions. No, there doesn't have to be a loss. There's no loss in having to honor another person, right? Because when you make the conscious choice to connect with the other, by honoring and understanding an opposing viewpoint, really what you're actually doing is making the choice to heal the wound of separation from which we all collectively suffer. And we each play a role in having created this reality that we experience. And so that means we each have to take responsibility for it by choosing conscious connection over, say, something like winning an argument, right? And that's what this world needs, and that's what our podcast intends to deliver. More conscious connection to heal our wounds of separation, more love and more understanding for our enemies to as a way to heal the fractured nature of our own personal internal struggle, one conversation at a time.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Ken, and this is my co-host Joanna on the distant end, and I'd like to welcome you
Hey,
to the Leather and Lace podcast, our pilot episode. We're going to introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about the overall purpose and goal of our podcast, what we're going to be hoping to achieve over the course of the coming months and years in the development of this discussion, and give you an idea of what we're all about. Just kind of talk about our backgrounds a little bit and why we feel that we have perhaps some unique qualifications to initiate, hold space, and engage in a conversation about the topics that we plan to discuss. Uh, Joanna, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I think what's important to me and for you is to be able to communicate to the people who resonate with our podcast is why we're doing this in the first place. And so, just for a little bit of background, Ken and I, we met through a shared interest in the law of one material, which is a spiritual philosophy and teaching channeled by the organization L&L Research that basically states that everything in creation is one. Now, I'm sure that this material will likely be a recurring topic on this podcast because it does offer so many incredible and profound spiritual insights into a plethora of topics like, oh, I don't know, the beginning of creation, which is, I think, every human being is interested in learning about. It even talks about like the purpose of suffering, even, shall I say, aliens and UFOs, which is the current hot topic and so much more. But anyway, Ken is a volunteer for the L&L Research's prison ministry program, which, as part of the small and mighty team at L&L Research, I help to manage. And because being of service to others is a key teaching of the Law of One material, when Ken and I expressed interest in collaborating to start a podcast, the main question that we wanted to answer was what need in the world are we helping to meet in creating this podcast? And in the words of Jackie DeShannon's hit song from 1965, we kind of landed on the answer that essentially what the world needs now is love. But with the world growing more and more polarized and segregated in thoughts, beliefs, politics, religion, economic opportunity, I mean, you name it, it just kind of seems like there's not much room for love to be offered. And, we can all get lost in the sauce, in analysis, speculation, and debate regarding why there's so much hate and anger and division in the world. And oh my gosh, who is at fault for all this hate and division? We basically believe that there is really only one fundamental antidote for the division and hate that pervade our communities, and that antidote is unity and connection. So it is our intent that through this podcast, we can inspire people who want to build a better and more loving world. If that's you, I'm hoping your ears are perking. We want to inspire you to disrupt. We love that word, disrupt, the narratives of separation and to seek unity and connection, not just with the people with whom you agree, that's easy, but especially and particularly the people with whom you do not agree. It's our belief that, and this is important, that the division and hate that we are collectively experiencing is actually an invaluable opportunity that is bringing to our collective awareness of the deep divide that is present within each of us, actually, and that the collective struggle that we're facing to find peace and harmony with each other begins within each of our own internal struggles to balance and integrate the opposing yet beautifully and divinely complementary energies of the masculine and the feminine, as symbolized by the name of our podcast, Leather and Lace. And so we do invite you to join us as we discuss all kinds of topics, many of which may be quite polarizing, but we certainly welcome the challenge. And essentially, our conversations will seek not to further separation by championing our own viewpoints as if they are the true viewpoint or the most superior viewpoint, even though we will certainly express our views authentically, but our conversations will always aim to understand and to honor the other perspective, whatever that may be. Because essentially, when you honor and understand an opposing perspective, that doesn't mean you're required to agree with it or to even deny your own convictions. No, there doesn't have to be a loss. There's no loss in having to honor another person, right? Because when you make the conscious choice to connect with the other, by honoring and understanding an opposing viewpoint, really what you're actually doing is making the choice to heal the wound of separation from which we all collectively suffer. And we each play a role in having created this reality that we experience. And so that means we each have to take responsibility for it by choosing conscious connection over, say, something like winning an argument, right? And that's what this world needs, and that's what our podcast intends to deliver. More conscious connection to heal our wounds of separation, more love and more understanding for our enemies to as a way to heal the fractured nature of our own personal internal struggle, one conversation at a time.
Fantastic. Excellent introduction. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think you've touched on all the themes in detail, and I'm so excited to be able to partner with you, Joanna, in this endeavor,
Oh.
and looking forward to interacting with, engaging with, and just becoming uh, more familiar with the audience that resonates with this type of message. I know there are many people out there, have met hundreds or thousands of them online and a few in person over the course of the last maybe 7 or 8 years that I've been interested in this type of material myself. And it's fantastic to see that people are now engaging in this sort of public discourse. They're not just sitting at home reading this material by themselves and contemplating and reflecting and focusing on self-awareness, although that's a very important part of
Mhm.
this conversation too. Um, Something has happened, I think, in the last several years where it seems that individuals are now not just coming together in groups in things like conferences and retreats, those formal settings, but they are doing what we're doing here and having informal dialogue and beginning to congeal and concretize that into an expression, a message that they're comfortable sharing and putting out to the world, and not holding on to their own viewpoints, thinking who's going to care, who's going to listen to this, or who's going to think I'm a weirdo or a freak for sharing this information with the world. So It's exciting for more than just personal reasons. It's exciting because I see the cohesiveness that's starting to spread and to work its way around the world in this fashion. And
Yeah.
hopefully we can just be a small example of that. Um, why do we think we're qualified to do this? You know, neither one of us is any type of spiritual guru or teacher, and neither one of us has really background in any type of religious or formal spiritual training, although we've both read, studied, and learned quite a bit over our respective individual journeys. Some of that material is common to us both, and probably most of it is not. So each of us individually will bring a very unique, different, and sometimes polarized set of opinions, and that hopefully will add to and not take away from the discussion and the conversation that we're going to be engaging in. We hope to demonstrate a balanced, fair, and respectful way to do that, and not, there may be arguments and there may be some moments
I
where
hope so.
yeah, let's do it.
Let's see how that goes.
Let's have some arguments. But again, it comes down to the baseline is respect. It's about approach. It's about coming to the table with the foremost expectation of unity. And as Joanna said, love is the foundation. And if we can do that as two individuals or with individuals across the spectrum who are going to be joining us through these conversations, then the hope is that that can be continually replicated. My own background, I was a 23-year U.S. Air Force officer, and I retired in 2017. So my background is I came from a very large organization where mission accomplishment and what we'll get into a discussion about is I saw the much more masculine achievement, go out and do, accomplish an objective, get this done, no room for error, this everything with a timetable and a minimum set of standards, and very little room for things like nurturing and compassion and the more feminine aspects of the power balance dynamic that we'll be analyzing over the course of our discussions together. And that was done for a reason. I know that the current militaries of our world operate that way for a very specific reason. And so that's the perspective that I grew into adulthood with. And then I left the military. And for the last 7 years, it was almost like the coin flipped over and the light switch went from on to off. And I began looking at an alternative view of, is there a way to look at the world differently, to operate in the world differently, to behave myself in the world and in my fellow relationships differently than I have ever been shown before. And after 7 years of looking at many different ways of doing that and following what I would say are a myriad of different practices that aim to achieve those ends, the conclusion I've come to is yes, there are many different ways that we can do that. And I don't purport to be an expert or authority on any of them, but I'm interested in all of them, and I'm interested in hearing about others' experiences that have led them to what they consider to be a more balanced perspective and more balanced way of being on this planet. I know we can change the way that we are attacking one another, that we are harming one another, the way that we are representing um, elitist or wealthy or famous ideals and ends above the ideals of the rest of the population. I'm certain that we can be more balanced in our methodologies of living on this planet. And so hopefully that's what this conversation is going to steer us toward. Joanna, how about you? What makes you qualified to participate in this discourse?
Well, I resonate with your optimism, in knowing that I think we can do this as a species. I think we can. And it really does come down to our own, like, again, there's this own responsibility that each of us must make to build those connections and those bridges instead of trying to prove yourself right about anything, because fundamentally, we don't know anything. Most of us don't know much about much. So I think when you come from that humble place, it makes it easier. So I love everything you said there, Ken. And this is why we're doing this together, because we are both optimistic that there is a more beautiful world out there that we can build together And it begins with these kinds of conversations and these commitments to connect, especially with the ones that we're most polarized with. So yeah, hey there, I'm Joanna. And I think that what makes me most credible to speak on healing the division and hate in the world through the seeking of conscious connection is not because I have prestigious letters behind my name, because I've studied psychology with some depth, or am a doctorate in some field related to human interactions, or, and it's not because I've attended spiritual intensive trainings in India, Nepal, or some other mystical land that I hope to visit one day. No, I cannot claim those for my background, but what does, I think, ironically make me credible is how comfortable I am with accepting my own ignorance.
Mm.
I mean, I really do believe that most of us know very little about anything. Even experts, especially ones that are self-proclaimed experts, which I never want to be. I don't want to be one of those people that I'm an expert in this. They're not always believable or trustworthy, actually. And so, I mean, it seems like this is my experience. Maybe it's your experience. It almost feels like we're in a house of smoke and mirrors,
Mm.
and we're all just trying to navigate this space as sanely as possible to the best of our ability. So let's give each other grace. And so I'm not always so invested in being right. Especially when it comes to polarizing topics. And that's what I mean when you come into a conversation or you just show up with a bit of humility that, hey, like I do have a certain level of ignorance with things, and I don't need to showboat and try to scream and shout so that you think I'm right about something. I'm much more interested in, yes, being heard and respected, but really, what I'm really interested in is understanding why someone believes what they believe, especially if they believe something differently. And also in their background, in their life experience, which I'm sure is full, just like mine has been full, what of their background has contributed to that perspective? I mean, because I myself have had quite an eventful and I'll say, non-basic life journey. And I'm sure that my journey informs my perspectives as well. And oh my God, the learning that can happen when we can recognize that everybody has had a beautiful, full life journey, and that we would, as a species, get so much more evolved, in how we are when we can see everybody as like a holy man that we can learn from,
Mm.
you know. Um, but anyway, so some elements of my background include growing up in the slums of Manila, Philippines, and immigrating to the United States when I was 6 years old. I was raised by a father who likely suffers from narcissistic personality disorder, which gave me all kinds of catalysts. Like Ken, I also served in the military. I was in the US Army for a few years during 9/11. And another big part of my life that offered a lot of catalyst was being indoctrinated into the by Christian dogma. And I don't mean anything negative about that in a way that like I'm putting down the Christian faith, because there are many things positive that have come out of Jesus's gospel. But when I say indoctrinated by Christian dogma, I'm really mainly speaking about the parts that don't align with Jesus's gospel of love.
Mm.
And because of that, that upbringing made me atheist for many years, until, long story short, until COVID hit, and all that free time led me to experience a very profound spiritual awakening. Like, I wasn't even looking for it to happen. I wasn't desperate about anything. The universe, I don't know, did its thing. And I was an atheist, and now I believe in alien channelings. Anyway, quite a transformation. But I think what I value most is how my spiritual awakening inspired me to accept the fact that, I personally, on a deeply spiritual level, just needed to make some changes. And one of those big changes was the realization that I just did not thrive in the corporate space. And so after over 10 years of working in corporate communications and um, all of that jazz, I decided to just pursue a different direction that better aligned with my heart's calling. And that new direction led me to becoming a part of the LNL research team, which I don't have words to express how grateful I am for that. And it was actually through my work there that I met Ken. And now we're here daring to create something meaningful together that we intend to be of service to others. So thanks, Ken.
Absolutely fantastic and great introduction. Again, great to be partnered with you on this endeavor and look forward to great things to come. So why don't we get started and talk a little bit about the theme that we've chosen for this overall podcast, and what we're going to focus on is the masculine and feminine dynamic, and so that right now within our current culture, we're seeing a lot of this dynamic play out in the themes of things like gender identification and gender equality, and this is making it into the public consciousness and the public discourse in the manner of identifying the actual male female sexes. And the question is, are we identified by the specific sex organs that we have when we're born? Can those change? Can we alter or change or become a different sex or gender as we evolve as human beings? Our conversation is, however, going to go beyond that sort of area of focus, and I think it's important from the start for us to elucidate exactly how and why that is. When we talk about the masculine and feminine forces, we're talking more on a beginning on an esoteric or spiritual level, even. There's a lot of the spiritual teachings that talk about the source of creation, God, the consciousness that makes all of what is in creation being this perfect stillness, this non-moving universal force that just is for all of eternity. And when it begins or births the intention to create, it must do something different than stillness in order to make something experienceable. And what it does is create polar opposites from the very beginning. And those polar opposites are the two forces that are positive, negative, or become identified in, again, many different teachings as the male or female or masculine, feminine forces. So when we speak of the theme of this discussion being masculine, feminine, what we're really talking about is the polarities that exist in literally all of creation, and they either exist in a balanced and harmonious way, or they exist in a imbalanced or disharmonious way. What we're seeing play out in what I would surmise is almost every area within our culture and within cultures throughout the world right now is that many or most of those dynamics, those created dynamics of families, of relationships, friendships, the various systems that we use and rely on to operate our societal structures, is we can very easily identify imbalances in almost universally every single one of those areas. So our topic list that we're going to choose for this program will cover just about every possible area you could think in society and looking at them through the lens of that masculine, feminine power structure. Um, One example, and actually we're going to start with the first episode that we're going to go into is talking about science and spirituality, and we'll get into a little bit more in a few moments about how that's going to play out in the discussion itself. But one example that within science is that the scientific paradigm saw 300 or 400 years ago that religion or spirituality, as it was being portrayed to mankind several centuries ago, had taken control of the understanding and the amount of information, the type of information that was allowed to make it to the individual level as far as their connectivity to God, to the divine, to all of existence. And whether they knew it or understood it or not at that time, the scientific minds of the time decided we're going to take a very masculine oriented, very action oriented, very logical, rational approach to um, pulling back or restraining some of the control that that religious force has upon the definition and the description of the reality paradigm. So we now have those two entities operating as essentially polar opposites who have no common ground any longer in our society. They state claims as to who has responsibility and authority for describing and telling the rest of us how reality, both in this plane of physical experience and after this plane of experience, if they even acknowledge there is such a thing, supposedly works. And we're left in the middle with this chasm of 90 something percent of the universe still being undefined or undescribable. Like we still do not know, even scientists will tell us to this day that 95% of our universe, they still do not have an ability to detect, measure, or explain to anyone how it actually operates. Our hope in this discussion is that by beginning to discuss and reveal and bring to the table in an honest way the experiences that people are not just starting to have now, they've been having for thousands of years, but those experiences have been compartmentalized, they've been demonized, they've been contained, they've been punished, those who chose to teach or speak about those experiences. We are finally in a point in our history where, thank you to things like the internet and freedom of information and the ability to communicate openly across all borders, almost all borders of the world, those experiences cannot be contained anymore. And the bag of popcorn is just starting to explode. People are coming out all over the world and now confidently saying, "Oh, I see ghosts. I talk to dead people. I see UFOs. I have energetic experiences. I connect with crystals. I have seen angels and archangels, and the list goes on and on and on and on." This is what we're going to lead into. It's not just talking about these two forces and how they're out of balance. It literally is they are the balancing these forces is the means by which an individual then reconnects themselves to that spiritual source of being and then begins to understand better who they are so that they can begin to operate in the world in a more aligned and more compatible way with the way that the creation originally intended. So, a lot of detail there, a lot of information,
Yeah.
yes, to start out with, but every one of these, hopefully, every one of these topics is going to, again, be looked at within the lens of a common theme. And we are not the experts on any of these topics, nor on the masculine, feminine forces themselves, and are both, I think, I speak for Joanna when I say we're excited to know that we're going to be learning just as much as anyone in the audience as we go through this discussion process too. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if the word expert applies to something like this. This is very human. It's a very human thing to experience um, duality and trying to make sense of what does it mean to be a balanced person. That's why I have a hard time even saying we got to balance the masculine and the feminine because what am I even saying, right? Like, what does that even mean?
Mhm.
And so I really hope that our conversations can provide like practical means as to how to attain such a balance because there's just always these like lines like balance this or find your center but without any real concrete idea of what we're talking about and saying this stuff. So for me, when I say balance the feminine and the masculine, I really mean like integrate.
Mhm.
For instance, when we say like you brought up science and spirituality, they do seem like they're polar opposites. One is the scientific perspective is very much materialist, and they don't have to be. I think there's a better way forward where it can integrate spirituality and spirituality being the feminine energy because it's undefined. It's boundless. There's a lot of potential. It's infinite, right? When we think about the things that are discussed within spiritual teachings, how it's completely infinite. It's almost uncontainable,
Mhm.
but it can it can be integrated with science. And that's where we say to balance is to be able to integrate and take it in. And so on a personal from a personal perspective and experience, it's when you're just living your life and you have a very strong perspective about something and you meet somebody who has an opposite opinion, you can battle it out as we've been doing and has not really delivered positive results for us as a species. Or you can try to understand and connect and integrate some of that opposing belief by at least understanding it and finding love for that person and then learning from it and just realizing, hey, there are other points of views. I might not be right, and that's okay. And just because it's a very, maybe it's a masculine energy to try to dominate a truth and claim truth. But if you allow a little bit of that feminine energy to come in and to have a little bit of humility and understanding that maybe you could be wrong or like it's not that important to dominate another perspective, then we're talking progress. Then we're talking balance. And but otherwise, I think you did a wonderful job explaining what we're here to talk about. And it goes way beyond men and women dynamics.
Mhm.
It's so much more profound than that. It's creation and what it means to be, to exist, and how these forces, the masculine and the feminine energies come into play, and how important it is to explore that and to find that connection between. And I think when we speak of masculine and feminine, it's also representative in the disconnect between the heart and the mind. And so that's another thing we're trying to bring into our exploration is this is very much about connecting the two together. Because when it's not connected, when we disregard the heart and just claim everything should be based on logic, that again, where has that taken us? Where has that taken us to look at emotions and feelings and even anger or something like that with such negative views? And that's a rejection that we need to examine and stop projecting and instead integrate within each of us, which will then reflect out into the collective.
Very good. Thanks, Joanna. And so, our first month of topics, we spent some time kind of really thinking about like how do we best introduce this vast, broad idea that really does seek to talk about what could be everything in creation. How do we distill that down to the first month of discussion topics that were going to be hopefully relevant and interesting for the greatest number of folks? So what we're going to start out with, as we just alluded to, is a discussion on science and spirituality. Can the two get along? Can these two respective what seem like polarized schools of thought ever come to any sort of consensus in their not only theoretical and philosophical, but practical applications about where we as humans and how we as humans interact with this so-called universe or reality. Um, so we'll offer what hopefully will be some not only unique but also historical and time-tested theories on what both of those respective cylinders or schools of thought bring to the table, and maybe some ideas, some new ideas about ways that we're already seeing. For example, things like Reiki healing, for example, using the body and the mind to do healing is being incorporated into many aspects of the modern medicinal system. So that is one area where what typically has been seen as a very materialist type paradigm is now starting in some ways to open the window a little bit to the little bit less materialistic and physical specific modalities being included in its arena. It's exciting stuff. All right,
Nice.
Jenna, what's show number two about?
All right. So after we have an engaging and dynamic discussion on science and spirituality and whether or not they can get along, we are excited to get weird with you for the following episode and dedicate that to talking about aliens and UAPs. Are they
Yeah.
good or are they bad? Should we be scared or hopeful? Now, while we wait for satisfying answers to those legit questions, in the meantime, we can ask ourselves, what can we learn from this heightened time in history when we could literally be coming close to being in contact with ETs? And then to think about how can what we learn during this time of confusion and mystery, how can what we learn help us to move towards connection and unity? Because again, like we said, that would be the only antidote that can heal these wounds of separation for which we all suffer. So I'm sure that the topic of UFOs and aliens can offer us some meaningful insights into that exploration of the duality and how we can further and balance and integrate that within ourselves.
But come on, folks, we're going from on planet, doing a little history, and then we're blasting right off the planet into outer space in just the first two episodes. Who's not going to want to hang around for that?
I mean, I would sign me up.
Me too, me too. We're a little biased though, I guess. So,
Yeah.
speaking of learning, as you just brought up, our third episode is going to be about education, the educational system, and how the current system that we have in place, I perceive, and I think a lot of folks are starting to look at this as again a very masculine focused oriented structure that exists not only to educate our children, but to prepare them for what let's just acknowledge is a very profit motive capitalist oriented system. And there's a lot about that system that is very regimented, very domineering, does not cater to, in a lot of ways, the individual child's unique needs, unique interests. We're seeing a lot more children be diagnosed with things like autism and ADHD and all these different types of um, spectrum, we're calling them oriented dynamics, neurodivergent dynamics that indicate that not only are all children different, they're even far more different than we've ever thought possible. We'll get into an understanding and maybe a little bit about what the new children being born in the last several decades, what they really are as far as coming from a spiritual perspective, how their consciousness is truly different and demands and needs different things, not only from parents, but also as they're progressing through the educational system. I believe, and I think hopefully Joanna shares at least some of this, that if we don't start to take a innovative and creative look at the way that we are building and carrying out education in our country and across this world, we're going to leave a lot more children behind than we already have. So we'll take hopefully a balanced look at that as well and see where we go with the educational system. What about our fourth show?
Ooh, this one's exciting. We are taking, it's almost like we're going to go to the lab and have a more practical application into our exploration of the feminine and masculine dynamic by, well, Ken is going to put himself in an elevated state, which is representative of the feminine and the potential to just explore and not have any lines that you can't cross. And we'll see what kind of beautiful insights can come from his elevated state. And I will be able to offer some structure, some of that masculine energy of providing some prompts that can activate some of the the insights that will emerge from him in this wisdom position of his connection, that he can attain from such a state. And yeah, we'll play around in that way of being able to allow and give space for creativity, for knowledge sharing, and then providing some structure around that. It'll be fun. And we will take turns. I will have my time when I will be elevated. But for this first one, it will be Ken, and I'm excited for that.
It's going to get crazy. I feel like we need to sign waivers or something before we start this whole process, but it's going to be awesome. Can't wait.
Yes, it'll be fun. So, again, because we are both very much big students of the Law of One material, and particularly the part where it says inspires seekers to be of service to others, we always want to kind of leave you with something practical and meaningful when you take the time and spend with us for our podcast. So what we thought was a good way to do that was I'm going to draw a tarot card and hopefully get some insight from that you can take with you until next week when you join us again. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a card. Oh, this one just decided to pop up.
You had one
Okay.
jump out right away, huh?
Yeah. And it is the Ten of Swords.
Hmm.
Um, so the Ten of Swords, some people might say is a negative card, but I don't really believe in qualifying a card negative or positive. There's always some insight that can come from it. And yeah, okay, the picture of the guy stabbed with 10 swords doesn't seem like it would be positive. But the message of this that you can take with you for the next week is thinking about in your life where you could use a little bit of healing, where you've been wounded. The number 10 is about almost like a final, something concluding. So there's this energy, and my intuition is telling me that there is something that many of you who are watching can look into of like having been wronged by somebody. Maybe there hasn't been closure. And now is a good time to kind of dedicate some time to think about that and how you can heal that and move on from that. So if that speaks to you, awesome. And if it doesn't, maybe it will at some point, but take that with you until next week. Any
Fantastic.
thoughts on that, Ken?
Yeah, so I've told you before, I'm not super familiar with the use of the tarot, and I am a big fan of symbolic interpretation in just about anything, whether that's
Mhm.
dreams or even real life situations. I find myself always trying to do some sort of Jungian analysis on just about anything that's happening. So, um, the number 10 as a totality or culminating representation seems to mean a lot with regard to we're just finishing off what in a lot of ways was a very turbulent and uncertain year for a lot of people.
Mhm.
We are, at least in our country, moving into a new paradigm, a new period of governmental administration, which is always a stressful time no matter which side of the divide you're on. And so that presents open and new opportunities for all of us. And as we were just talking about prior to this show, we're seeing all sorts of what could be called traumas and disasters and hurricanes and fires and all kinds of different sort of natural and unnatural events that are going on our planet right now that can be both seen as uh, traumatic and difficult, but also potential rebuilding opportunities. And so, depending on what perspective that we look at these things from, I think, as Joanna stated, you could see it as a negative in the circumstance itself, or you can look from maybe a little bit higher or broader view and see that every one of these is a catalyst opportunity, a experiential opportunity that gives us the ability to reflect and then hopefully become better as we go forward.
Beautiful. Exactly. Always better to take a higher perspective of something because when you do that, it gives you permission to to find the positive in something negative. We don't have to wallow in something, I mean, it's important to feel your emotions, but it's also important to kind of see above them and to gain the wisdom that can be attained through it. Because I think most of us have had bad times happen and we've survived them and we've come out stronger. That's not unique to me or Ken. That's kind of a human experience. And I think that's kind of what the Ten of Swords is speaking to at this point, at this moment, especially how he brought up, the end of the year, the culmination of a year, the culmination of an administration. There's a lot that can happen when something ends and then a new thing happens. And it's good to come at that with the perspective of there's wisdom to be gained here versus I'm in pain and oh, my life is terrible. There's wisdom to be gained in seeing things from a more uh, from a wisdom perspective.
Absolutely.
But we hope you enjoyed that little tarot message and that it can help you this week. Something to think about. And in fact, if we did give you something to think about throughout this episode, we really encourage you to like the video and to subscribe. Obviously, we're a new podcast, so we're hoping to build our audience. And if we gave you something to think about, consider supporting us in that way. And yeah, we hope to see you again next week.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is we're just kicking this off. It's an exciting time of new starts and newness for us, and we want to hear from you. This is a conversation. It's two of us talking on a screen, but hopefully we're going to get plenty of feedback. So leave us your comments. Tell us what you think about this episode, about the ideas for the upcoming topics and ideas that we went through today. We want to hear what you think about the discourse today. What have you learned through your own respective efforts at self-healing or healing within relationships or families, the divisions that have previously existed? What ideas do you have? What resources have been meaningful or useful for you that we might be able to reference and incorporating into future shows as well? So thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. We will read the comments and take it and integrate it within ourselves. Even if you completely disagree of everything we said, please let us know because there's always an opportunity to learn and hearing from the other. And yeah, basically, in closing, we want to invite you to see that within every moment, within every issue, you always have the choice to either widen the divide or to build a bridge. The choice is yours.
And remember, the world we create begins with the way we see each other. So let's choose wisely.
All right, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Y'all take care.